Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here today and have an opportunity to present my work. This is part of a bigger project, and my slides are not working properly, so we switched to PDFs, and I won't have the same dramatic effect of things scrolling and flying on the screen, but it's all good. And so this is a bigger project, and it's on campaigns. And when I present this in the United States, when I present overseas, I don't have to answer this question. When I present here in the US, I usually have to answer this first question, which is, why would anyone study campaigns in the US? Because the big debate in the American literature is, do campaigns even matter? Because even this last presidential election, though closely followed by the media, political scientists were calling it as early as May and even April. Some of the early predictions down to the state and the Electoral college vote. Even if you believe that about the US, and that's somewhat controversial, if you study the rest of the world, campaigns matter, and they matter a lot. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is that in a lot of these places, campaign periods are very short, right? So some campaign periods might be 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 45 days of television ads in Brazil, for example. The second reason is that partisanship is a lot weaker. So here in the US, what primarily happens is during a campaign, people's partisanship gets activated, and they ultimately vote for the party that they should have realized that they identified with long before. In Brazil, something like 2% of the electorate are actual partisans. Other countries could be even lower. The third thing is that your decision about who to vote for can be much more complicated outside the United States for a couple of reasons. One is that there are a lot more candidates. The second is that the electoral formulas can be kind of complicated, right? So one possibility is a runoff system instead of a single member district like ours. And in a runoff system, you might need to vote strategically instead of voting sincerely. Here in the US, you can vote sincerely most of the time, with occasional exceptions. And even if you don't like any of these reasons, campaigns have this important purpose for democracy, which is it's the moment when politicians are accountable to the electorate. It's the moment when they communicate directly. It is the essence of democracy. So I'm engaged in a large research agenda studying political campaigns across primarily Latin America. And there's two broad questions. And the first one is about what kinds of information do politicians provide? And that involves, do they use negative messages or positive messages? That is, do they attack or do they promote their own messages? The second thing is, and that's what I'm going to focus on today, the second part of information, however, is about the quality of information. Do they talk about real policy? Do they provide information that might be, quote unquote, useful to voters or not? The second part of the project is about the effects of this. How does it affect voters? Does it affect participation, trust, learning, information? Does it make for better voting? And I'm doing this in Latin America, primarily through a study of campaign messages, to study the kinds of information that's being provided, and then doing some experimental and some survey work on voters to see how they are affected by different types of messages. Today, however, you're just going to get one small piece of this, which is I'm going to show you a game theoretic model of campaign tone. That is, it's a sort of theoretical framework to explain why candidates attack each other in some environments and do not in others. I'm going to test it with campaign messages, that is with political advertisements from 14 different countries, and with candidates operating under a variety of different electoral systems. And I'll show you a couple of campaign ads if the computer does cooperate, and I think it will. So I'll proceed with just 3 steps. The first is I'm going to go through a game theoretical model briefly and talk about the kinds of implications and predictions it makes. I'm going to give you 2 applications of it, 2 formal quantitative tests, and then I'll give you an overview of the other parts of the project that I've talked about. How does this affect voters? How does it affect learning and information? Why should we care about all this at the end? So the model is actually really simple. One of the challenges in putting together one of these models, though, is that all previous game theoretical work on campaigns, especially on negative campaign, with one very small exception, it models what happens in a district election where there's 2 candidates, kind of like the United States of America, right? And the one exception, they say, what if there's a 3rd candidate, right? Okay, so most elections globally, most democracies on the planet do not have single member district elections. with just two candidates, right? So we need to develop something that we can apply very generally. And that's what I've tried to do here. In the model, you can have as many candidates as you want. So you can have M candidates. And before the election, before the campaign starts, each candidate has some valence. And that's their attractiveness, or how popular they are, how much support they have from the general population. During the campaign, each candidate simultaneously sends either one positive message that promotes themselves, or they can send one negative message that attacks any of the other candidates. They just get to send one message. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. What do those messages do? Well, one of the key innovations of the model is that nobody really knows, right? All they know is what happens in expectation. So a positive message is going to be drawn from a normal distribution with some parameter theta p. A negative is drawn from another normal. And then this is what I call this backfire parameter, which is some cultures, some countries, people don't like negative campaign, and they'll actually punish you. The voters will punish you for doing it. We need to restrict these in some way, and what I'm going to do, another key feature of the model, is that negative campaigns are in expectation twice as big as positive messages, but because they're repeated in the variance component, they're also twice as risky, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the backfire parameter is basically half the size of a positive campaign. So after they send their message, there's some realization of the message effect, and then voters vote for whoever's the most popular in their eyes. Okay, so the key features of the model, again, payoffs here for every candidate. Every candidate's going to maximize the probability of victory, which seems fairly reasonable to me. This is obviously a really simple model, doesn't have spatial politics, doesn't have lots of things. It actually works very well across the cases I've studied in Latin America. This might disturb some of you. Elections are valence-driven, not spatial. So elections are essentially a popularity contest. It isn't about left and right. I haven't seen a lot of campaigns in Latin America that had a strong left-right component. I'm going to show you one ad that sort of shows that, but I'm happy to defend this assumption as well as acknowledging its problems. Voters aren't modeled explicitly in this. Some people might not like that as well. But a key feature, the key feature here is that campaign effects aren't known. They're sort of risky choices that are only known in expectation. And just briefly to defend that a little bit, candidates don't know exactly what the effect of their ad is going to be, right? They run one ad, they run a different ad, and so you saw sort of, for example, the Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. The Clinton campaign was casting about looking for something that would work, and they obviously didn't find something that would work, right? There's lots of examples of both positive and negative messages that have backfired on candidates. Someone ran a sort of negative message that generated sympathy for that candidate, actually helped them. So the basic idea, I think, is defensible. By the way, I welcome, if you want to interrupt me with questions anytime, whatever the norm is here, that's great. Okay, so this is what the math that comes out of this model if there's just two candidates. And so these would be the post-campaign valences. So if both of them run a positive campaign, candidate one after the election will have his or her initial valence, plus the result of that ad talking about how they got their Eagle Scout when they were 12 and all those wonderful things. And candidate two, her post-election valence is going to be about, her post-election valence will be her original valence plus the effect of her positive message promoting herself, her education, etc. Let's consider if candidate one, on the other hand, runs a negative campaign, this is what happens. Candidate one doesn't get the benefit of the positive message and bears a small cost, small in expectation, for going negative, because people generally don't like that. Candidate two runs a positive campaign, that's great, but suffers the benefit of the negative message. Again, this is all an expectation. So the payoffs become the probability of victory. With just two candidates, it's a really clean, normal CDF, a cumulative density function normal. It's actually really clean. With more than, please.
On the negative messages, is that just a backfire of their own negative message, or is that the opponent's negative message against them?
The N or the B?
Either one.
Okay, so the negative is the N1 here is, that's the damage to candidate 2 caused by candidate 1 attacking. She didn't really sell all those brownie or Girl Scout cookies. Her mom did it for her, right? Whatever they say. But on the other hand, the B1 here, that's the backfire, the cost to me of, oh, they're going negative. We don't like that, right? Which could vary both across culture. And then there are actually some countries which have legal norms against these kinds of things. And there can be other penalties for doing this. So thank you for the question. Okay, so just a few observations, technical observations, which I won't get into much. This is really clean with just 2 candidates. You just use a simple, standard normal CDF, and you get the answers. With more than 2 candidates, and with other kinds of electoral rules, this gets really, really messy, really, really fast. And so the way I've calculated equilibria that I'm about to show you, and all the predictions, is through simulations, sort of simulating thousands of campaigns, calculating the probability of victory, and then plugging that into a program that calculates the Nash equilibria. There's some accuracy cost. There's a speed cost. Just running this for 4 candidates can take as long as a month. If I were to have 8 candidates, and 4 candidates generates 256 strategy sets times the number of parameters you want to exploit. If I had, say, 8 candidates, it would generate almost 17 million sets of strategies to exploit, just not tractable. But it is at least generalizable. That is, this strategy, as opposed to previous theoretical work, you could take this and apply it to any country, any set of electoral rules, and if you had access to one of the IBM supercomputers, any number of candidates. So this is one way to summarize the predictions of the model, and I'm going to start up here. And the x-axis here is candidate 1's valence. That's how popular candidate 1 was before the election. The y-axis is candidate 2's valence, how popular candidate 2 was before the valence. And the shading is how negative the campaign gets. And so if it were white, it would mean there were no negative campaign. The darker it is, the more negative it is in this case. And what you'll notice is when it's close, both candidates are going negative, right? When it's a close election, both candidates basically shoot at each other. On the other hand, when one candidate, say this corresponds to candidate 1 being really popular, and candidate 2 being a weak candidate, well then candidate 1 runs a positive message. Candidate 2 is sort of constantly shooting at candidate 1, effectively as a sort of Hail Mary strategy, and trying to bring candidate 1 down, which is actually consistent with what we observed. And I could tell, I can share lots of anecdotes with you about campaigns I've observed that are consistent with that. What do the other graphs represent? Well, this is what happens if you take the thetas and make them all bigger. Now, why would you do that? You might do that if you were talking about a new democracy, or you might do that if you were talking about Mexico. Why? There's no re-election in Mexico, right? So there's a lot more information learned during campaigns. Consequently, the impact of all your advertisements, all your messages should be bigger. The campaign should be more important. In other words, you should actually see even more negativity in a place like Mexico or in Brazil. Down here, this shows what's happened. This shows what happens, if you were to add a 3rd candidate. Now, I can't show 3 candidates in 2 dimensions. That defines a cube. So I fixed one candidate as being very popular and having valence 4. Here's candidate 1, here's candidate 2. You can see when all 3 of them are really close, they're all very popular, no one goes negative. Because if they do, the other 2 will free ride, one of them will win the election. As candidate 1 becomes less popular, you'll see that candidates 2 and 3 sort of reverts to really a 2-player game, and they attack each other. Same thing happens. And then there are all sorts of interesting mixed strategy that come up in there. The real benefit from this approach, however, is that you can apply it to lots of different kinds of electoral systems with even more candidates. So I went to 4 candidates, and I also added multi-member districts and open list PR. Two important lessons here. The first one is the more candidates there are, the less negative campaign there is, for a couple of reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. So you can see that in some contexts, there's no reason to go negative, right? If there's a lot of competitive candidates, they will not attack each other. The second thing is some of these more complicated electoral rules, there's actually a lot of complicated strategies. The red shading here is there are no pure Nash equilibria in these situations. There are only equilibria in mixed strategies. Okay, So to make this practical and to look at some data, I'm going to talk about two empirical implications. And the first one is the targets of negative ads and the sources of negative ads can be defined around electoral thresholds. And this comes out of the model. And so what is an electoral threshold in this sense? It's not the type we normally talk about when we're talking about electoral rules. It's two candidates define a threshold if candidate I is currently behind candidate, and if candidate I attacks candidate J, candidate I could pull ahead and win. So just by lowering that one candidate's support, I can win the election. Then I'm a threshold candidate. And rules, so electoral rules are going to define who's above and who's below the thresholds along with standings. Okay, so let me just give you a quick explanation of this because I'm going to test this exact set of hypotheses in just a moment. So if you had a single member district, there's always, in a typical US single member district, there's always one threshold. And it's between candidate 1 and candidate 2. If candidate 2 lowers candidate 1's vote share sufficiently, candidate 2 will be elected. No one else can say that. No one else can say, if I lower João's vote share, I will be elected. Marta can't say that, right? So this is the only electoral threshold. On the other hand, if we had a runoff system, it gets a little more complicated. What would a runoff system be? If if the leader gets less than 50%, we'll have a second round election. So in this context, you could imagine Clarice going after João to prevent João from winning, and Clarice could even pull ahead and win in the first round. Takagi could go after João or after Clarice, either of them, and thus guarantee his place in the second round. You could even imagine João going after one of them to bump their vote share down and win in the first round. In other words, there are many other options with potential victorious payoffs to negative campaign. There's a lot more. And we could extend this to other electoral rules. If you look at a place like Brazil, which has open list PR, they have a really complicated system, right? So in Brazil, when you're electing a federal deputy, you vote for one candidate, and after the election, votes are totaled by party, and then seats are distributed according to the totals. And who gets those seats? The top vote getters. So this actually does create some interesting opportunities for attack. So for example, you look at Trinidad, lost. But if Trinidad went after Marta, maybe Trinidad could attack someone in his own party. Similarly, if you look at Party Y, if Party Y bumped up its vote share just a little bit, it'd get that second seat. So Eudoro could go after Rui, or it could go after any one of these other parties. So there are lots of complicated strategies. There's two observations to make about that. One of the unrealistic assumptions of my model is that everybody knows the standings, right? There were 1,000 candidates for deputy in Sao Paulo. And these are typically sort of semi-professional to unprofessional campaigns. They don't have full information. And I haven't shown you this today, but if you take away full information, all these thresholds go away, and there's no negative campaign open list PR. Yes, sir?
What I know about Taiwan back in the 70s and the 80s, the party played a big role in coordinating this kind of thing. So
that's right.
How does it enter into your picture?
So there are no parties in this. In this model, there are no parties. That would change things. So if you change from having the individual candidates be the agents to having parties be the agent, it changes things fundamentally. Because then the parties are competing for one of two things. Either they're trying to maximize their vote share in the legislature, or they're competing for a prime minister to be a coalition, sort of major coalition partner. Depending on the way they balance those two games, different things could happen. If they're maximizing seat share, most of the time they're going to run positive campaigns. If they're competing for coalition membership or the prime ministership, then they will attacking each other is more likely. There's no negative campaign ever in Brazilian open list PR. In Finnish open list PR, there is some negative campaign, but it's between the parties. And they're competing for control of the government. So I have some Finnish ads. I don't speak Finnish. I had someone translate them, and assuming they translated them correctly, there are attacks between the parties. Okay. So the second set of empirical implications are we could manipulate the relative size of the thetas. We could make campaigns have bigger effects, have smaller effects, and we could further change the ratios. I fixed, for the purposes of the equilibria I showed you, the negative theta to be twice the positive theta. But maybe that isn't always true. And in particular, we might argue that it's not true when voters don't know anything about anyone. That is, if you've never heard of the candidate before, if it's Mexico and no one can run for re-election, every politician is sort of a new challenger every single time, maybe theta positive is a lot bigger. When that happens, you're going to see less negativity. And obviously, the backfire parameter will reduce negativity. Tony?
So just to justify one assumption for me before you go on. Why is negative campaigning necessarily more risky? Because given the informational story that you're starting to tell, it's not entirely. I saw initially why you were doing it for tractability, but what justifies that assumption?
And I guess there's a couple ways you can go with that. One is that positive messages tend to be bland. I'm just speaking empirically. Positive messages are typically bland, sort of music, feel good, it's morning in America sorts of messages. Negative messages, and this may have to do with human psychology, they draw more attention. People may pay more attention to them. They make people anxious or upset in different ways. They're also more likely to contain specific information that may be controversial. So for example, if you attack me on the basis of my stand on taxes, for example, you will naturally alienate some people and not alienate others. Right? That's a fact of providing more information. Whereas if I run a positive message about my volunteer work, how could anybody say anything bad about that? So maybe they could, right? But the risk of that is smaller. So that is my argument for that. All right, so to test this, and perhaps the part that we'll have some technical challenges on, but I'll do my best. I've spent several years on this, collecting advertisements across Latin America with two broad strategies. And the first was to focus on two countries, Mexico and Brazil, and go to each of these states. And so I've been all over Mexico and Brazil setting up computers that would watch television for months before an election and record everything that was said and then extract from the soccer games and telenovelas and so on and drive my research assistants crazy, extract advertisements. The other thing, though, is without the subnational focus, I was, just due to some time, and I was able to do the same thing, not as deeply in some other countries. And so at this point, I have about 17,000 political advertisements from Latin America, finally organized into a usable database. I'm going to show you two bits of evidence in favor of my model, the first using all the data, and the second just focusing on the predictions about single-member districts. And I've merged in some polling data and so on, so I can measure who's in front and who's behind and correlate that with whether or not they attack or so on. So I do want to show you a couple of ads that essentially they're representative of the campaigns I'm talking about, and they illustrate the key points. And so the first one is from Colombia 2006, President Uribe. He basically stabilized the country, which has been in a civil war for 40 years, very controversial, but he ran an always positive campaign. You're not going to hear this, unfortunately, for whatever reason. That's fine. So he appears, he talks about, we've been working to reconstruct and deliver security to Colombia. He's got for those of you that are into medieval Catholic art, he's got the nice saintly glow behind him, and so on and so on and so on. He doesn't talk about any other candidates. It's just a positive message. We got this done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Adelante, presidente, and that's it. And so the front runner, and he was way out in front, and he won with over 65% of the vote. Front runner goes positive. Don't even pay attention to the little people. Lula, President Lula, let's see, Lula is here. Lula was in exactly the same position the same year, extremely popular for his economic success as well as other programs. And he did the same thing. The other point he illustrates, of course, is that Brazilians are a lot more fun than Colombians, right? So this is let's see, don't trade the certain for the doubtful. I want Lula again. I'm not going to throw away everything I've achieved. Go back to the suffocation. Why start over from zero? I already know what I want. With Lula, let's see, with Lula, my life got better. More things are coming, yes, sir, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Brazilians can do that all night long, so I'll stop there and let it continue. In contrast, his opponent, who was behind and constantly attacked him, his nickname was sort of roughly translated as broccoli popsicle. I mean, he's healthy, but he's boring. He's good for you, but he's boring. Let's see if I can show you one of his. See if it must be behind. Yeah, okay, so he says, I'm going to do what President Lula didn't do. I'm going to defend the borders. And then he says, President Lula is the champion of high taxes. We need more tax. He says, less taxes, more jobs, and so on and so on and so on. So it was constantly about, call it a tax or contrast. It was constantly about the alternative that he offered. Mexico was even more negative. Let's see, that must be this one. Yeah. And this was Felipe Calderon, who eventually won. And he was way behind in January 2006. Some Spanish consultants told him, attack, attack, attack. And that's what he did. And he slowly gained ground. Eventually, López Obrador started shooting back, which is entirely consistent with the model. And, oh goodness. No, that's not it. That's not it. Let me try that again. Well, something's happening somewhere. The little one? All right, well, you can take my word for it. In fact, the Mexicans disliked it so much that they actually they disliked how much negative campaigning there was that they held hearings on it and have since somewhat regulated, not entirely, but somewhat regulated and banned negative campaigning. All right, so I'll skip through those. All right. Just a little bit of data, just comparing across electoral rules. These are gubernatorial elections, round 2, and gubernatorial elections, round 1. What's nice about that comparison is that this is essentially the United States. It's a single-member district with 2 candidates. Whoever gets the majority wins. This is that more complex environment where there's a potential of a runoff, Senate and then federal deputy. And so there's only 2 candidates. There's 1 threshold, so that ratio is 0.5. The average number of candidates in these gubernatorial elections was 7 thresholds, a little bit lower. The Senate is a single-member district again, but lots of people tend to run for those. And so there were many more candidates. You can see the ratio goes down. And indeed, the proportion of advertisements that you would call a tax falls in an entirely consistent and predictable pattern. This isn't a definitive hypothesis test because there are other things that are different between these. Besides the number of candidates and ratios and electoral rules, these are much higher profile. They're much better funded and so on. So this is preliminary evidence, but it is consistent. This is a second set of evidence just focusing on single-member districts. So these are logistic regressions where the dependent variable is whether or not an advertisement was a negative or a positive. And so negative is coded 1. And so the unit of analysis is the advertisement. You can see I've got 3,000 single-member district elections. They combine both single-member district and runoff elections. And what you'll notice is I have interactions between the standing of the candidate and how close they were. So what do you see? You see that the front runner is more likely to go negative. Well, that's not consistent with my theory. Actually, it is, right? Because of the interaction, the way to interpret that first coefficient is the front runner is more likely to go negative when it's really close, when the lead is 0. As the front runner pulls ahead, they're less and less likely to use attack strategies, exactly as predicted. The second place candidate, less likely to go negative when they're really close to the third place candidate. As they pull ahead of the third place candidate, it becomes that 2-candidate race, they go negative. Third place candidate, no difference from anyone else unless they're in a runoff system. If they're in the runoff system, they attack. I can do more with this in terms of isolating the target of the attack, and I've put so much time into the database, I have not yet done that. So that's the next step with this particular part of the project, is to analyze, are they attacking the right candidate? But again, this evidence strongly supports the predictions from the model. Okay, so I'll tell you for just a couple of minutes about some of the other dimensions of the project. And so I've been looking at how does this affect participation. And so there's a big literature on politics in the United States and on voting behavior that is arguing about, do negative campaign ads alienate and demobilize the electorate, or do they actually mobilize? And there are experiments and so on. Whatever the outcome of that debate, the effect should be bigger in a place like Latin America. If campaigns matter more there, those effects should be larger. Second, do these negative messages perhaps provide more information? That argument has been made in the US. And so I'll just show you a little bit of preliminary evidence before I wrap up. This is from one of the voter sides of the project. This is from an experiment I did in Brasilia. And so subjects they watched a video about the environment. They all thought I was a sort of crazy American environmentalist. Embedded in there were advertisements, and one of them was a political ad. And then some people didn't get any political ad. And the political ad was either positive or negative, and they were identical in every other way, and I'm happy to talk about the script if anyone wants to know. This just breaks out turnout by education. And the story it tells is actually fairly stark. You can see that in the lowest education group, there is an unbelievably large swing between reporting that they would vote and reporting that they would not vote. And that's actually sort of bigger. One reviewer who didn't like this said, that's bigger than in all recorded media studies, a bigger effect. And so they rejected it, unfortunately for me, but I'll find another home for it. You'll notice that that effect goes away for higher education levels. But at least, and you'll also notice that the sample size is small. It's actually difficult and sometimes dangerous in some places in Brazil to try to recruit people to participate in these kinds of studies. But ultimately, it suggests that this is something to be concerned about on the participation side, that watching a negative ad was very demobilizing. There are some alternative hypotheses, and if you're interested, I'm happy to talk about them. The second part of this is about information. So this uses all the advertisements, and what it looks at, all of those messages have been coded for, do they talk about personal traits? Do they talk about issues? And an issue statement might be sort of, what are my issues? Sewage, education, jobs. But they don't even say whether or not they want more sewage or less sewage. They just sort of say, my issues are sewage. Goals and achievements means that the candidate makes a statement about what they're going to achieve or what they have achieved. We're going to create jobs. We did create jobs. Or they criticize someone else. So-and-so will not be able to create jobs. So-and-so's administration did not create jobs. And then lastly, do they make any specific policy statements? If you elect me, I'm going to try to raise taxes and redistribute more, whatever. The story is the same across all four categories, which is there's consistently more information provided in these negative advertisements. So for whatever reason, and there's additional work to be done on this, these differences are significant. The other part of the story is that this difference is small. So this is actually the information we might want most. We might want voters to know what government is actually going to do rather than not make promises about what it's going to achieve. That's the smallest category, which is unfortunate. There's a little bit more information in negative ads. Brazil had a series of massive scandals from 2002 to 2006 under the first Lula administration. And they involved buying legislators. And so legislators were receiving payments of anywhere from 10 to 100,000 a month. And there was another scandal. There were a series of scandals like that. This is an open list PR advertisement. And many of the deputies who received those payments went on to run for office again. And some of them were ultimately reelected, right? If they had been in a single member district, they would have been hammered by their opponents, right? They would have been incessantly crucified. One guy got caught at the airport with something like $700,000 in his underwear. They called this the underwear scandal, right? So these people would have been crucified. This ad deals with that scandal, and there's a sort of little song, and the guy says, sort of, corrupt person, I'm not going to vote for you. Corrupt person, I'm not going to vote for you. The candidate appears and says, you'd have to be really stupid to vote for one of those guys. But they never say who they are, ever, right? And so this system doesn't reward calling people out for underperforming. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem. Because we're talking about the biggest corruption scandal in recent Brazilian history, and nobody's drawing attention to it in campaign ads. That's troubling. They did talk about it at the presidential level, but a lot of the corruption was at this level. So that's an overview of the project. Sort of my two conclusions and my punchline. The two conclusions, there's a strong relationship between electoral rules, political competition, and negative campaigning. And so some systems are going to have a lot more, some systems are going to have a lot less. We can understand why, and we can understand who does the attacking by looking at electoral rules and competition. The second thing is that there seems to be this cost associated with negative campaigns in the experimental work. It holds up in some survey data I have as well, which is voters don't like it. And new voters who have less experience with democracy find it somewhat distasteful. Rather than evidence that democracy is real and we should be excited about this vibrant exchange of ideas, they find it somewhat alienating. And so many of these young democracies have seen support for democracy actually falling. On the other hand, on the upside, negative messages have more information, right? And as you just saw, as I tried to show you with that the corruption ad, maybe that's the sort of takeaway point, is negative campaigning, it might reduce participation, voters might not like it, but maybe Latin America needs more of it anyway. So that's the project. I have some additional slides if you want to, if you have questions to talk more about the experiments and the other components. And I'd be delighted to take your questions.
Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks.
And we have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions. We're accelerating a little bit because of some scheduling this afternoon. So
when they run negative campaigns, and obviously if they say this person likes to raise taxes, and obviously like you said, they're gonna eliminate some of the general public who are endorsed. Do they take, is that a big part of their, I guess, their agenda? Is that they know that they might not need those voters, so they're like, let's cut our losses there and just try out for the bigger population?
I think that's right. And that's actually a good suggestion on a way to go with this. You'll notice that these, you might think of these as ends and these as means, right? And so everyone likes good ends. Unemployment's up, crime's down. Can't argue with that, right? Not everybody likes means, right? You know, sort of pick any policy area. And there are many different ways to think about maximizing education, maximizing economic growth, maximizing employment. There are different paths there, and those paths are controversial naturally. So politicians would naturally prefer to talk about what did I get done, or what am I going to get done. Notice that in a place like Mexico, that's problematic because no one gets reelected, right? So you can just make promises about what you're going to do, and then maybe you deliver, and maybe you don't. It is the case that that the more the electorate is polarized ideologically, the more the electorate starts to demand this kind of information. That's one of my hypotheses, is that different kinds of electoral markets demand different kinds of information. Politicians would always like to stay here if they can, because it's just not controversial. But voters in some environments will start to demand these things. That would be my working hypothesis. So. Yes, please.
I thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting. I'm from Ecuador, and I have a question. Do you think that maybe the stronger libel laws or less freedom of press plays anything in the negative ad situation, because candidates would be less likely to put them out if they feared that they would be persecuted?
So many Latin American countries do not have the First Amendment and aren't bashful about regulating political speech. And so in Brazil, the Electoral court meets during campaigns on a daily basis, but not on weekends. And if someone attacks you, you can sue them, and the Electoral court will rule quickly and might cut my ads, or even give you a free time on television to respond. So what do people do? If they're going to get nasty, they do it on Friday because they know the court won't meet over the weekend, right? Mexico also has the IFE, the Federal Electoral Institute, and they serve that purpose. At the same time, most of those laws address egregious slander. So some really nasty things happened in 1989 where on the President Lula, he won in 2002, but he was running in 89, they thought he might win. They went after him for sort of an illegitimate daughter who supposedly he had wanted her to have an abortion. She tried to kill herself, and then that was the end of the election for him. Those sorts of things are illegal and do get some response, but candidates will attack each other in spite of that. In the last Mexican election, although slander is illegal, one of the campaigns ran an ad that said, "So-and-so's a liar, don't believe him." And IFE reviewed it and said, "Yeah, we think that's true." You can run that ad. And so, I don't know if you ever listen to Mexican, I don't know if the Mexican stations reach here, but they reach San Diego, and and even they broadcast some of them in English, and so depending on what station you're listening to, ads will come out and say, "So-and-so's a liar, don't listen to him." At the same time, there's certainly manipulation of the press. So in Nicaragua, for example, the Sandinistas took control of the media, and Hugo Chavez as well. So they have these literally an hour advertisement on state channels that was just all about in Ecuador, Noboa and his opponent both had lots of airtime. Noboa had more. He was a very rich business person who was running for president. He had an advertisement that went something like, "If I'm elected, everyone will get a free house. Come by my campaign headquarters and sign up for your free house." So somehow he lost. So anyway, thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
So all these national level elections, do you look at in the sample you have, or do you have local elections?
So some local election advertisements were captured because they were happening at the same time. In Latin America, as in the United States, many of those local elections are much less professional and they don't have the budgets for televised advertisements. And in other cases, the time is different. I do have some Mexican municipal presidents, effectively mayor advertisements, and a few others, a few city council, but those would be exceptional candidates in large cities. At the local level, it's going to be more about personal appearances, and it's also going to be about radio. Radio is actually a lot harder to code as well because you can use the visual cues to capture and find advertisements. With audio, you have to listen to the whole soccer game. So it's more challenging. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So would you expect the same results to hold in an open list PR system in which you had fewer candidates because it was, for example, more difficult to register, or the parties were exercising greater control at the level of candidate selection?
So two things come up there. One is fewer candidates, and the second is going back to the other question about if the party starts to act as an agent. Parties obviously won't put up with competition within their own candidates. So in Chile, they have open list PR, and they only elect 2 candidates per seat. Typically, there are 4 competitive candidates, 2 from a conservative coalition and 2 from the center-right coalition. And there are some cases, relatively rare, but there are some cases where candidates from one list will make some reference or negative reference about candidates on the other list. And so it's not that common, but it does happen. I've never seen within party attacks. I've never seen within party attacks. And I don't think the Chilean parties would put up, they have a strong party system. In the Brazilian system, they would probably put up with that as long as you were a vote getter. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if in Brazil it's not so much about the kind of costs associated with negative campaigning, it's just that if you have such a large pool of candidates, you don't have the knowledge to negatively campaign. If I can't tell who's a front runner, for most candidates they have virtually no record to run on, so all I can say is positive things about myself, and it's not because it costs the payoff, it's such a low information campaign environment.
Well, so I think that's most of the story, and then I'll put a footnote on that. Most of the story, you might think about it as sort of Coca-Cola and Pepsi are the presidential election, and real estate agents are the open list PR election. And the real estate agent advertisements appear, and they're sort of all sort of shining, happy people ready to sell you a house, right? And they might actually be willing to attack each other if they knew who was taking their business. In fact, my wife is a realtor, and when someone's trying to take her business or so on, things aren't so nice, right? So, but I think you're absolutely right, and that also illustrates the sort of footnote, which is one way to move forward with this is to take all the thousands of advertisements I have from federal deputy candidates and look at their vote share, because they're running in these massive districts. So one of my cases is the state of Bahia. That's the size of France, right? I have their vote share by municipality. So one thing that could happen is, where this kind of thing would be possible, is suppose you have two candidates in the same municipality, right? Some of these small towns are fought out between two candidates. And in that environment, in theory, they could go negative or unchanged. They never do, right? But maybe they do on the sort of when they're making speeches. If there are two sides to a particular municipality's political sphere, maybe the two candidates from each side sort of duke it out. Because at the very micro level, there aren't 1,000 candidates, right? But even so, you still don't see you never see the negative campaign. So, but I think you're right ultimately that it's a different market when there's that many people. And you have a budget constraint, right? You only have so much money and time to put into advertising. You need to put it into promoting yourself. Otherwise, you're empowering everyone else. Whatever you do to bring that one person down, you don't know if those votes are coming to you or just going to help everyone else.
And so if you were going to make the policy recommendation, right, say, okay, how do we get better campaigns? Is it actually that we need to move away from this PR system? Or is it simply that maybe we need stronger parties that do a better job of, or make it more difficult to register candidates, or create higher thresholds? I mean, is it about the electoral system itself, or some of the other things that presumably you could intervene with?
Either of those two things would promote more attacks and thus more, in theory, information. So moving to smaller districts would create conflict, and those corrupt legislators would not be reelected. Similarly, if parties were to be, quote unquote, more empowered, then they could replace the deputies as the main agents. And in fact, the handful of small parties that are stronger, more ideological, they run advertisements, and they represent themselves as a party. One of the things that's nice about openless PR, in spite of all its disadvantages, is you can be whatever you want to be. And so it actually creates, in large districts, opportunities for many kinds of representation. You can have local representation, but you can also have diffuse at the same time. It's kind of like a mixed system without having a mixed system. And so one of the next steps in this project is to look at how the distribution of votes of candidates is related to the kinds of messages they deliver. So maybe the candidates who are very local only talk about their municipality. The candidates who are diffuse, maybe they actually do take more ideological positions, and so on and so on and so on. Maybe there's more information there. And I don't know the answer to that yet. Yes, sir.
So do you find these effects to be of similar magnitudes across the country? And I'm curious to the distribution of the ads across the country as to if there are some that are particularly moving.
Off the top of my head, I cannot tell you. I can tell you Chile was just on average less negative than other places. Maybe the Chileans are very polite. 17 years of dictatorship, maybe they're all very polite, I don't know. The Mexicans, the Peruvians, they were very negative. I don't actually have, I'll tell you a couple things about the distribution of the data. Because of the way I collected the data, Brazil and Mexico are heavily overrepresented because I focused on them for months and months and months, and I wanted to have a clean sample there. The other countries are represented, so I have hundreds of ads from Peru and Ecuador, but for example, in Paraguay, they just didn't understand my instructions, right? And in El Salvador, power went out, right? And so my distribution is different. I don't have a strong sense yet of that I can report on substantive differences across country. I can tell you about a few surprises. So one surprise was actually El Salvador, and that they have closeless PR. They talked about real issues, like unbelievably real issues. There was an ad that mentioned Iraq. They actually sent like 100 guys to Iraq with the Bush coalition. They made a mention of judicial reform. When was the last time you heard about an American politician about judicial reform? They talked a lot about crime, obviously. but they had a lot of attacks between the parties, and they were more substantive on average than many other countries. And that was a kind of interesting surprise.
So could you run the analysis on the Brazilian subsample? That may be the same coefficient estimates and
Exactly the same.
or even sort of directionally, like further, like on that one.
So if I just ran Brazil, I don't know. I haven't sort of subset it by country. Brazil and Mexico are both, again, overrepresented, so it'd probably be the other cases that would change. I did run it with country fixed effects in the other models, but that's definitely one of the things I need to explore. Do you have any particular?
I have no intuition with that, but
Yeah.
but the question is, are there universals here? Is this a broad Latin America issue? Might we expect to have comparable things in the U.S. or in Europe? Or I don't know. But since it's an unbalanced sample in terms of the distribution of observations, so I wonder what's going on in each of these places.
Right, I think that's an important robustness check to see whether or not the results are consistent. My intuition watching politics in the United States is that it's fairly consistent with at least the single member district outcomes. Arizona runs their state elections, state house, or multi-member districts. At least when I lived in Arizona, the patterns there seemed consistent. I guess one of the nice things is if I did want to expand it, there's a lot of data for the US. There's not a lot of variance in electoral rules and other things I'm interested in, but there's a lot of data to sort of validate the single member district outcomes. That would be promising. I was just at a negative campaigning conference in Frankfurt, actually, and they were all Europeans and so on. They actually found this very compelling. So maybe they liked the videos, but they seem to like the theory too. So, but those are important steps I need to take. You're absolutely right. Thanks.
So you said in Mexico, you're never reelected. What does that mean? You're only allowed to run once for one office?
You can run for other offices, but it means that, so it does mean you have to have some track record to be president, and all the major candidates have been governor. Most, not all of them, but many have been, or most have been governor of some state, including the last couple of presidents had been governor somewhere. But it means if you run for Congress, you're going to be there 3 years and then you're gone. And so there's 100% turnover in Congress every 3 years, which is really unbelievable in terms of professionalization and things like that. It is. It is indeed. So, yeah. It is indeed.
Well, on this chaotic note,
Yeah.
thank you for coming, Scott.
Thank you, my pleasure.